Today, we're gonna go over a couple of definitions for different types of runs. .34 miles, 7 minutes, 18 seconds per mile today. Enjoying an absolutely beautiful sunrise in Chicago, running along the lakefront here along Lake Michigan. It's an absolutely lovely time of year to be running in Chicago, and I've been enjoying some of the beautiful scenery. Today I was running probably a little bit too fast for my easy run, although technically on my training plan it's called a recovery run. If you've been following the channel for a while, you know I've been kind of grappling with what to call these runs. But overall, it kind of leads me to what I want to talk about today is just defining some of these running terms generally. A lot of you guys that are watching that are new, welcome to the channel. But you might be getting into running or getting back into running after a hiatus. And I've been throwing out some terms lately because I've been trying out something new with a coach, and it's a little bit more of a structured plan. But in either event, I just want to set down some kind of baseline definitions for what I think about when I hear these terms. The first thing I want to talk about is a tempo run. And a tempo run for me, and my coach uses it a little bit differently. For me, a tempo run is usually a run where the bulk of the miles are going to be, or at least a big chunk of miles are going to be at a certain pace, whether that's a marathon pace or a faster pace, or depending if you're not training for a marathon, if you're training for a half marathon or a 10K, it might be at a faster pace than your goal race or at your goal race pace. The way I normally do them is the tempos are usually around marathon pace or maybe half marathon pace, but not too much faster. For this marathon training plan, the tempo runs have been pretty brutal because the paces are between half marathon and 10K pace in the way that my coach defines them, and so they've been tough. But the intervals that the tempos are a little bit shorter, like 2 miles, 1 mile, things like that. Last week's was a 3 mile tempo, which was brutal for me because I don't normally run kind of that fast at that pace. Even though it's between half marathon and 10K pace, a 3 mile tempo seemed like a really long tempo to me because, and this goes into kind of the next definition, when I talk about marathon pace or half marathon pace, 10K pace, whatever the pace is, it isn't what you could run a half marathon or a marathon in today. It's what your goal half marathon pace is. So by the end of your training block or like the training plan, what do you think those times will be? And so for me right now in like week 4 of this plan, that tempo pace, which is between half marathon and 10K pace, feels still really fast, and it's not something that is easy for me to maintain for 3 miles within the context of a larger workout where there's other kind of speed work that I'm doing in there. So that's what paces are when people talk about paces or they list them like in Strava. They're keying off of their goal race paces, not what they could do today. Now, in terms of speed work, I mentioned speed work or intervals or interval work. What people are talking about is usually something that's even faster than tempo. So for me, I said tempo is like my between half marathon and 10K paces, which for me is at about 6:25 to 6:30 minutes per mile. My speed work should probably be something faster than that. So 10K paces, 5K paces, for someone who's training for the marathon. I sometimes will dip into like things that are as fast as mile pace, but that's pretty rare. I won't really go that fast that frequently. If you're training for something like a 10K or a 5K specifically, let's say you're a high school or college cross-country runner, then your interval work is going to be much faster than that because your interval work is going to be stuff that's mile pace or faster. So when you're doing your 400s or your 200s, those are going to be pretty fast, faster than I would probably ever run. But for me, as someone who trains for the marathon, my fastest days are usually stuff that's at 10K pace or 5K pace, which for me is 6 minutes per mile is what I would shoot for towards the end of this training plan if I were going to do a time trial or a race, an actual 5K. The next thing that I'll talk about is the long run, or the LSD, long slow distance. Generally, when people are talking long run, what they're talking about is when you're going out on Saturday or Sunday for your long run, something that's relatively easy pace, something that is designed to, if you're newer to marathon running or distance running, those days are the days that you're working on extending and running farther than you've ever run before. So if you've never run 12 miles or never run 13 miles, those long, slow distance days are days where you're not pushing the pace. Your goal is to slow down your pace and get to having more time on feet. Now, after you have any of these hard workouts, whether it's a long, slow distance run, a tempo run, or a speed run, you might want to have a recovery run. And this is probably where a lot of people will vary on definition. And that's because the goals are different and the philosophies are going to be different depending on how you train and what your training philosophies are. But essentially, the recovery run is something that's designed to be a run in between your harder workouts. So if you're kind of in just a run a bunch of miles category, the recovery run is something that you're using to stimulate blood flow, get all your systems flushed, so any waste products that are in there can get pushed out, and any other things to repair the muscles that need to be brought in can be brought in. So you're just flushing the system, bad stuff out, good stuff in. Kind of that's what the recovery run does. You're gonna go really, really slow for that. Several minutes slower than your goal marathon or 5K pace is generally how a lot of people approach the recovery run. A lot of people look at your heart rate when you're looking at those recovery runs. The other definition for a way that people kind of approach recovery runs is they might say it's something that you're wanting to get out there and get running. You don't want to have a complete day off, but you do want to have a little bit of stimulus on the muscles in between your harder workouts. So a run where you can get in some quality miles in between the harder workouts that you have. The workout training plan that I'm working on now kind of fits into that second category. I'm still kind of having a hard time with the paces. So the paces for me for my recovery runs are 30 to 90 seconds off of marathon pace, which for me feels a little bit fast for recovery runs. So I've just become calling them steady state runs. Generally is just for you're going out for a run, whether it's a short, medium, or long run, but you're picking something that's not gonna be too taxing, something that you can run for the entire time. Active recovery is another term that is kind of confusing. That's the one I'll talk about next. Can be used in two contexts, and that's where I think there's a little bit of confusion. Active recovery can be kind of a way of describing like what a recovery run's goal should be. So we talked about recovery runs earlier. If you're talking about active recovery, you're talking about like what can you do to really flush those muscles. So that's what people might be talking about if they're talking about active recovery. The other way that active recovery is used is in the middle of a speed workout or a tempo workout. And so on those kinds of runs, what do you do in between the intervals? So let's say I've got a speed work day where I've got 6 sets of 800s. What am I doing in between the 800s that are at 5K pace? So am I stopping? Can I just catch my breath? Is it just resting? Or is it like walk jogging or jogging in between those intervals? For me, what kind of a hallmark of a tempo day is you don't ever stop. And speed workouts, you'll stop and you can rest or you can walk. That's kind of, for me, that's the loosest definition of the two. But in a tempo run, for me, after you do the 1 mile or the 2 mile tempo, what are you doing before the next one? And a lot of times for me, I would call that active recovery or just jogging in between the sets. So that way you are never stopping, but you're always constantly moving throughout the entire time. That's how I think of active recovery, but I know that I personally use the word active recovery to refer to runs that are runs on days that most people would probably just take the day off, but instead getting out there super slow and just making sure you're getting all the blood flowing, get the muscles warm, that kind of thing. Negative split. See, I told you these terms are kind of in no particular order. Negative split is a racing term that you'll frequently hear people talk about. You might even see it on t-shirts. It's become a very popular term. It's the way that I like to pace myself for racing, especially for longer races. I guess also for short races too. When I run like a mile or a 5K, I'm very aware of if I'm going to negative split. And that's the idea that, think about the splits are like, you think of like the mile split. How long did you run the mile in the course of a half marathon or a marathon? That's a split is one like kind of chunk of time. Negative split means for the first half you run a certain pace, and the second half you ran faster than the first half. Most people, when they race, they do it the other way around. They kind of go out too fast, and then they get really tired, and so the second half of the race is a little bit slower because they're getting tired and they're running low on energy and getting fatigued. Negative split is something that you can look at it two ways. Someone was either really strong or a very fierce competitor, and so the race pushed them to run the second half faster. Or you can think of it as a strategy. For me, the strategy for these longer distance races is they're not sprints, it's a marathon. So the cliche literally applies here. And so you pace yourself for the first half, and then for the second half, when everyone's starting to die, and all the adrenaline and excitement from the start of the race has worn off, then you start picking up the pace. The idea isn't that you pick up the pace and just run harder the second half. The idea is that the first half is very measured and a little bit more conservative than the second half, but negative splitting means the second half ran faster than the first. Another type of run that you might hear frequently is a ladder run. And a ladder run it can either be a one-way ladder, but usually it's a ladder up and down. And that's where you can look at the ladder kind of two ways, either in distance and or time, but usually it refers to distance. So a ladder might be you run one interval, like if it's a speed workout day, you might have a 400, then an 800, then a 1200, and then back down to 800 and then 400. So it's like steps is probably the better way, because if you look at your distances on a graph later, it'll look more like steps than it will look like a ladder, but you're climbing up the ladder, getting taller or farther in distance, and then coming back down. So that's what a ladder workout is. It works a whole bunch of different systems, and there's a lot of benefits to doing that type of workout. For me, they're really hard to do because I don't do too much speed work, and it's a lot of numbers to remember. You have to remember which numbers, what are your rest periods going to be like? Is it going to be active recovery in between the intervals, or is it going to be letting me walk and rest, that kind of thing, and at what paces? So there's a lot to remember. So ladder workouts are pretty finicky in my mind. I don't tend to do them very often, but that's what a ladder is if someone tells you that they're doing a ladder workout. The next thing I'll talk about is the cut down run. And so on a long run, that's typically where you'll see cut down runs. And a lot of these were invented to kind of put different stresses on the body and different strains that mimic a longer distance run without you having to put your body through the full length of that distance. So a lot of these are variations or things that you can inject into your long run to make it a long run plus, so a long run with other workouts in them. A cut down run is something that definitely fits into that category where you're simulating the amount you'll need to push and the fatigue you'll feel at the end of a run. So a cut down run is, let's say you have a certain pace at the beginning, doing a steady state run where you just pick the pace and you're going for the bulk of the run, and then the cut down part might be every mile or every half mile, whatever interval distance that you choose, without stopping. Each consecutive interval or distance length gets shorter. So you're not only having to work really hard, but you're working hardest at the point where your body is the most fatigued. So you're simulating a lot of that long distance end of race fatigue and what your body's going to feel like. The next thing I'll talk about, another thing to inject into a long run, is what I have on hand for my Saturday run is a long run with surge miles. And what surge miles or surge intervals are is as part of a longer run or as part of a longer workout, what you might have is a distance, and for my case it'll be miles, where for the like 3/4 of the mile I'll run at one pace, and then I'll surge and run to a faster pace for the last quarter mile. So for my workout coming up for my long run Saturday, which you'll see footage of tomorrow, it's 7 miles of steady state, and then 10 miles or 10 surge miles of 3/4 of a mile at 7:35 pace, and then the last quarter mile at half marathon pace, which is 6:35. So it's like really kind of like a cut down, but a severe one where I'm going one pace, and all of a sudden the last quarter mile I'm going to be going a lot faster or working a lot harder to do that. So that's a surge mile. They're really fun. You keep moving the entire time, so it's a kind of a variation on tempo, but they're also pretty tough because you never really get to recover, because instead of like a recovery, you're going back to a previous pace that you want to maintain, which is going to be a lot faster than what like an active recovery type pace would be. Before I go, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the term Fartlek, which is I don't know if it's a Swedish term, but it's a European running term which translates to speed play. And I think the traditional way to run a fartlek, if you want to be ultra like precise about it, is you have a group of people, and when you run kind of in a line or in a pack, and when you're at the back, you have to run past the group, and then you're in the lead for a short amount of time, and then you get to slow down a little bit and run the pace of the pack, and then the people at the back move to the front, and then the people at the back move to the front, people at the back move to, and you keep doing that, and that's what a fartlek run is. But people will kind of call lots of things fartleks. What people will call tempo runs, they'll call fartleks. But it's something where within a longer distance, you're varying the pace, and a lot of times people will call it like, you know, a couple minutes on, a couple minutes off. So a couple minutes at a steady state pace or a slower pace, and then that's your off, and then a couple minutes of on where you're surging forward. So kind of like a surge mile, but not necessarily based on distance. Usually fartleks are a lot of times based on time, but you can see them based on difference. So these are all kind of, if you think about them, they're all kind of doing similar things. And you might be able to even think about, well, a surge mile is technically kind of like a fartlek, so not necessarily incorrect, but just different ways of describing kind of the same thing. But fartlek is something that is probably the first like weird running term that you'll come across if you're starting to delve into running plans for the first time. And so that's something that I definitely want to cover, but variations and definitions vary wildly within that category of fartlek. The last thing I'll talk about is the Shakeout Run, and the Shakeout Run is a run that you do very close to a race. Shakeout runs are particularly important for, I think, two main reasons. One is you might be flying or traveling to wherever your race is, and so if from anyone who's a cross-country runner or a collegiate runner and you've spent all morning in a van driving from your location to where the meet is, you want to have a little bit of a shakeout run because you've just been sitting and your legs haven't been moving and it might be uncomfortable. Or if you're flying to somewhere else to go to a marathon, like if you're flying into Chicago for a world major marathon, you might want to, just because you've been on an airplane for a long time, you've been traveling, do a lot of things outside of your normal kind of routine. You want to shake out the legs, nothing too fast, nothing too far, just a little bit of run to get, again, the legs moving and the blood flowing. So that's something that you might want to do. The other main reason for it is to like get rid of a lot of nervous energy that you might have too. So again, shaking out some of the extra nerves is the main reason I like to do a shakeout run before a race, is because it's been what you've been looking forward to. It's what you've been training for. There's a lot of kind of emotion happening, and you just want to remind yourself, you know what, I know how to run. All the training's been done, hay's in the barn, so to speak. Now it's just time to race. But what do I do with this extra jitters? Let's just go for a quick little shakeout run, get a chance to maybe preview a part of the course, or just take in some scenery, or meet up with some friends that you're seeing for the race. So just get some of that extra like nervous energy out and get the blood flowing just a little bit before a race. But it's not a workout, definitely not a workout. So those are some common running terms that you might come across, and some not so common running terms that you might come across if you're delving into running plans. So hopefully that's helpful for you. If you guys have different definitions for some of these, I'd love to hear about them in the comments to see how different people are using and applying these terms, especially if you're not marathon training. So if you're doing something that's shorter, half marathon, 10K, 5K, or 8K racing, I'd love to hear kind of how you guys are using some of these terms as well, because my experience has been either as a high school cross-country and high school athlete, which was a very long time ago, or now more recently as a long-distance runner and marathoner. So there's a lot of space in between there for a lot of runners that are out there that may be using these differences differently, and I'd love to hear it. Before I go for today, I do want to remind you about the charity runner for this week. This week's charity runner is Bryce Turner. He's going to be running the Chicago Marathon and raising money for Mercy Home for Boys and Girls. I was very happy to donate $70 to Bryce's fundraising efforts, and I'll post a link in the description in case you'd like to learn more. That's all I have for today, everybody. Thanks so much for making it to the end of the video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Yo, what's going on?